Imagine a lonely winter dawn in Philadelphia's Fox Chase neighborhood, 1957. The air is frosty and still, sunlight slanting through bare trees. In the foggy quiet, a small cardboard box lies at the edge of a country lane. Inside that box is something heartbreaking: the little boy, just 4 years old, alone and silent. A local man named Fred Benonis found the box while checking rabbit traps one morning and realized something was terribly wrong. The next day, a college student heard word of a missing girl nearby and went back to that spot. When he lifted the lid and saw the child, he ran for the police. By dawn on February 25, 1957, a crowd of officers and reporters had gathered. I can only imagine the horror in their eyes as they lifted the blanket off that child. The boy's body was emaciated and battered. He had been wrapped in a tattered blanket and placed inside a large box that once held a baby bassinet. Bruises marred his arms, chest, and back. He had old scars on his ankles, shin, and groin from childhood surgeries. He was barely more than skin and bone from malnutrition. Doctors later determined he had died from blunt force blows to the head. Even more chilling, the medical examiner noted the boy was freshly groomed. His hair had been recently cut, and his fingernails neatly trimmed, as if someone had cleaned him after he was hurt. Police worked feverishly. They took the boy's fingerprints and hoped against hope someone would recognize him. Philadelphia plastered posters with the boy's face everywhere on gas meters, in schools, on hundreds of thousands of flyers, pleading for any hint of a name or family. Detectives searched the woods over and over. They found a tiny blue cap, a red and black scarf, even a monogrammed handkerchief with the letter G, but none of these clues led anywhere. One investigator even dressed the boy in a suit and took a photograph, saying this is how he would have looked alive, but still no one came forward to claim him. Rumors and theories sprang up to fill the void. One story said the child might have been a refugee from post-war Europe. Another said he was a kidnapped American boy. Detectives chased phantom suspects, traveling carnival folk, a local foster family. Even the man who found him, everyone was questioned. In the 1980s, a woman nicknamed Martha claimed her parents had bought a boy from his biological parents and kept him hidden in their basement, only to beat him to death. Police found her account eerie and somewhat credible, but they could never verify a single detail of her tale. So the child lay nameless in a pauper's grave at Ivy Hill Cemetery, marked only by a simple plaque reading "America's Unknown Child" and her weeping cherry tree. The city quietly mourned. Every February, on the anniversary of his discovery, volunteers and police left small toys and flowers at his grave, as if the entire community was silently promising, "We remember you." I have stood among those bouquets and teddy bears, praying that someone would one day come forward to call him by name. Years passed, but science kept advancing. In 1998, detectives exhumed the boy's remains, hoping new technology might help. They managed to get a DNA profile from a tooth and entered it into national databases, but there were no matches. Back into that unmarked grave he went, still the boy in the box. The breakthrough didn't come until 2019, when genetic genealogy became a game changer. Police exhumed his body a second time and sent DNA samples to labs that could read tiny fragments. I read how the experts compared his genome to every person on public genealogy databases, treating those scraps of DNA like pieces of a puzzle. It took nearly 3 years, and one genealogist described his DNA as being spread out like confetti, but eventually they made connections that no one thought possible. Finally, a clue emerged. The genetic network led to a match on the boy's mother's side. Detectives obtained a court order and began checking birth records of any children born to that woman in 1953. Then they found it, birth certificate for a boy born on January 13, 1953. His name was Joseph Augustus Sorelli, and his parents were listed on the form. When investigators met living relatives and did DNA tests, it all confirmed the boy in the box had a name and a family all along. At last, Philadelphia had an answer. On December 8, 2022, more than 65 years after the body was discovered, police held a news conference and told the world who he was. I remember watching the report. As the image of a smiling little boy named Joseph Sorelli filled the screen, the room burst into applause. Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw spoke with emotion. When people think about the boy in the box, a profound sadness is felt, not just because a child was murdered, but because his entire identity was taken away, she said. And now they were giving him his identity back. Hearing that name, Joseph Augustus Sorelli, felt like giving a voice back to a long silent life. But even with his name known, the case was far from over. Philadelphia detectives admitted that the main questions remained: who hurt him, and why? They said Joseph's birth parents had both died years ago, and that he had siblings now in their 60s who never knew this secret brother. Cap. Jason Smith of the homicide unit cautioned that solving the murder might be impossible after so many decades, and he urged the public to come forward with any memories. There's still a $20,000 reward, and police are asking anyone who was a child in the neighborhood in the 1950s to think back. I can only imagine someone in their 70s suddenly realizing the boy they knew next door was Joseph. That thought haunts me as much as it haunts them. 2 weeks later, on what would have been Joseph's 70th birthday, the city did something small but powerful. They put his name on a stone. A ceremony at Ivy Hill unveiled a new headstone bearing Joseph's name, his birth and death dates, and even a tiny portrait of the boy. I think of that morning even the sky seemed brighter as a cover was pulled away and his name was spoken out loud and concrete. Joseph finally had something permanent, a name on a stone. A place to be called by name for all time. Now I say his name whenever I pass the hospital where he was born or see an old Victorian home in West Philadelphia. Joseph Augustus Sorelli is no longer just a case file, he was a real child. And we did right by giving him a name, even if it was 6 decades late. His story taught me how every life matters, how important it is to keep searching. The mystery of who killed him may never be solved, but I will never let Joseph be just the boy in the box again. In a city that once mourned him in silence, we now remember Joseph. And that is more than he ever had.